So let me show you how some days go from a flash of inspiration that pops up on my lock screen to a sketch in my sketchbook. I shuffle through my photo library, so every time I unlock my phone there is often a different photo, and often photos I don't remember. I might have taken them days ago or years ago. This seagull really caught my attention, so I looked it up in my photo library. It was from my trip to the UK last year. In Margate, I snapped that flying seagull, which is quite hard to do, but I have lots of birds on my phone in different poses because I do always like to paint off my own references as much as I can rather than finding stuff on the internet. This is a pretty cheap little sketchbook. It is supposed to be 100% cotton. I'm not sure if it is. I don't have a chemistry lab, but it feels okay. It holds the water well and it's great for little sketches. It's got a pretty rough texture, and I bought this one off Alibaba, $10 US, and it's great for my little studies and practices. So I'd done the sketch off the photo, and then I popped in a couple more seagulls that I had on other photos taken at the same time. So just to make a little composition. I can be quite free with my sketchbook, and that's the point of this video, just to show you the value in having a loose sketches. Always have a sketchbook handy where you can have no regret painting, and if they turn out, that's great, and if not, well, that's great too. At least you try it. I'm using a calligraphy brush, and I'm using quite a big one. I want to keep it loose and not get caught up in too much detail, even though I will switch to smaller brushes later on. I start off with the ocean, bit of negative painting, keeping the seagull white for now. Put in a couple of hues of blue, and you can see it's quite wet. I want the pigment to create a nice texture. Next is the foreground of the beach. That's lighter with some raw sienna. And then we get to the middle part, which I make quite dark so that I have enough contrast between the seagulls and the background. That's a Van Dyke brown. I've added a bit of Van Dyke brown to my raw sienna, carefully going around the tail feathers and the legs of our main seagull there. Even though the sky is still wet, there's not a lot of bleeding happening there. And you can see I left a little bit of white to separate the two shapes. Whole exercise I'm showing you today would have taken less than half an hour. You can see I've not sped up my video. This is real time. I've just cut out a lot of the pauses and mixing, which accounts for roughly half the time that I'm painting. Couple of strokes into the wet sand. Here I am already using a smaller brush just to make sure that the white seagull shapes are fairly accurate. And then it's time to let that completely dry, because I'm going to pop in a sky, just a bit of lavender really. It's an overcast sky, but I do want a bit more color in there. Sketchbooks, always good opportunity to experiment with different colors. And in this case, I should have probably mixed a color with the same blue as the ocean. I'm not convinced that the lavender was the right choice. But once the seagull goes in, you won't even care about the sky. Dragging in a couple of darker lines of blue for some waves in the distance. Now we're 5 minutes in and I still haven't painted a seagull yet. Or have I? Because negative painting is just as important as positive painting, especially in watercolor when you want to leave things white. I strongly recommend you getting good at negative painting and leaving things out rather than using a masking fluid. It just looks stiff, it's a mess, it ruins your brushes, and it gets you that cutout effect. Now some artists are masterful at masking fluid and suits a certain technique and style of painting, and not for me. So now it's time to put in the dark. And I'm just carefully making sure that I don't lose too much of the white. Edges and the tips of the wings are black, and so are the tail feathers. So got to strike a balance there and maybe leave a little bit more white out than what's on the reference photo, just so that we have that contrast so that it really sort of pops against the background. I'm using a Princeton Aqua Elite brush. It's become my new favorite brush for precision and detailed things in my paintings because it's got a really stiff point but still has a lot of flex in it. It's just perfect. I almost can do away with any smaller brushes or riggers or fine liners. I can achieve an extremely fine point and a lot of details. It's almost like painting with a pen. And using a big calligraphy brush to start with and then a fine detail gives you also the nice contrast between really broad brush strokes and a lot of detail. And in painting, having lots of contrast, light and dark, hard and soft edges, warm and cool, thick and thin lines, any kind of contrast you can think of will make your painting more interesting. Onto my second seagull, same thing, edges, the tips of the wings, the feathers, darkened but leaving the rest white, so we have contrast. And then the one that's sitting there thinking about taking off with the other two or not, I'm keeping it quite simple. It's really all about the big seagull, so I don't want to add too much detail to this one. It's really a stepping stone from that one to the one on the right, and then leading up to the one that's a hero, obviously. A bit of dry brushing for the foreground. Pretend there's some detail in the sand. This will help with creating some depth, as in we can see things in the foreground more clearly than in the background, and then a few more seagulls that have already taken flight and on their way. That's it. That's my little sketch. And then because I was in the flow, I decided to do a more detailed painting of a single seagull, a portrait. I thought that would go nicely on this double spread. I'm not entirely sure what these pieces are called. I think it is a brown seagull or maybe a herring gull, but in either case, they are not, your classic white and grey seagulls. They have a lot of brown in them and a lot of speckles, which makes them a little bit more interesting to paint. The sketch here is quite important. I couldn't be as loose as I was in the other one, so I had to pay a bit of attention, get the proportions right. It's easy to turn seagulls into pigeons or into ducks, and that goes for any kind of bird. There are slight differences in the height and the size of the body and the neck and the head, etc. So you got to pay a little bit of attention. I mean, ultimately, bird is a bird. It's about painting. This is not botanical illustration, so it doesn't really matter that much. I'm adding a bit of blue here for some cooler color as a shadow under the chin, and that actually made it almost look like a pigeon, so should have probably stayed with a warmer tone there, but that's my first wash, so I can remedy that a little bit. Wet and wet is always good for birds. Start with a lighter wash all over and then drop in the darker tones where the light falls off. It's usually at the underside of the bird, tail feathers for example, and then I'm also paint the legs while the body is still wet and drag down the legs so that the body and the legs connect and blend with each other. Added a bit of red for my feet, and I'm not painting a lot of detail in my feet, never do, because painting individual talons or claws, whatever you call them, can look quite contrived very, very easily. I always sort of hint at feet, but never paint much detail into it. And then as soon as I've done that, the ground or the shadow, or in this case the rock, gets painted so that it connects with the feet, and you can't really see where the feet end and the ground starts. Zapping it with my hairdryer so that I can keep moving. I don't blow dry my bigger paintings very often. I let them settle naturally, but those small sketches, it doesn't really matter because there's not a lot of pigment to be pushed around. That's the reason why you let things settle naturally, because if you come in with the hairdryer too soon while you have a lot of pigment that's still wet on your page, you're going to move that around and it won't look the same as if you let it naturally settle, because different pigments settle in the paper at different speeds. That's how you get these wonderful effects and the granulation that you see in really beautiful watercolor paintings. So if you force dry it with a hairdryer, you will lose some of that effect. The second wash is to add a bit of detail, but I'm not going over the top, just hinting at some of the patterns on the wings and some splatter. And I don't care that the splatters go everywhere, not just on the bird. That connects the background with the foreground. Now at this size, we need to pay a bit of attention to the eyes. Again, I'm bringing out my Princeton brush. So nice to paint with for small details. The eyes are more than just dots. They gotta be small circles. Sometimes try and leave a little highlight in the eye as well. Again, with the highlights, got to be careful. You don't want to make it look like a cartoon, but it can often add a bit of life. And here comes the beak. The beaks of seagulls is quite distinct. They always look a bit cranky. They can't be too pointy and they can't be too round either. So you got to find the balance there. And here I'm going to cover the bit of blue that I painted first, warm that up a bit with some more of my brown for the shadow. And then a few more details. Now I've actually gone to an even finer brush because there was just a few tiny details I wanted to add in. A bit of shadow on the rock to create a bit of dimension. Palette goes away. I've got my little seagull spread. I hope you enjoyed this as a different video than my usual paintings, but I'll be back with a larger size later on this month.